Hi, my fourth grade friends. It's another chapter of Spring According to Humphrey. We are on chapter 8. Chapter 8 is called The Big Break. So let's get started. You'd think by now my job as a classroom hamster would have taught me what to expect in the classroom. But still, I was often caught off guard by humans and their behavior, especially that Friday. Friday is always the day of the week when I go home with one of my classmates for the weekend. I have fun, and I get to learn even more about my human friends. But instead of revealing who would take me home for the weekend, Mrs. Brisbane made a surprising announcement. Class, I'm going to be taking Humphrey and Og home for spring break. Joey is taking the tadpoles to his house for the week, she said. The week, I squeaked. Don't you mean the weekend? I'm not giving you any homework over spring break, she continued, but I want you to bring in more signs of spring. I think you'll find a lot of them. And when we get back, we can make a plan for Friday Fun Night and start a great new project. I still like the tightrope idea, tell the truth, Thomas said. I might even try it over spring break. Some of my friends laughed, but not me. Can't figure out why they call it spring break, I squeaked. What's broken about spring? No one answered. My friends seemed extra excited for the bell to ring at the end of the day, but I was extra confused. Now, don't get me wrong. I love going home with Mrs. Brisbane and spending time with her and her husband, Bert. And it's nice that Og would get to come with me. I thought he needed a break from the tadpoles. But I wondered what my friends would do over spring break. Even more, I wondered what would happen with Joy's tadpoles. Would they grow legs and arms and heads? Up to now, I hadn't seen much progress. It didn't matter what I wondered, because at the end of the day, Mrs. Brisbane brought my cage out to her car. Ms. Morales carried out Og's tank. Sue, you are a wonder, he said. Caring for all of these animals takes a lot of work, but the children get so much out of having them in the classroom. I guess it does take a lot of work to care for animals, but as a classroom pet, let me say it takes a lot of work to care for humans, too. In the end, all the work pays off, because I help my friends, and they help me. I like Mrs. Brisbane's house. It's painted a cheery shade of yellow, almost the color of a golden hamster like me, and has white shutters. Inside, she always has fresh flowers on the table, even when it's not spring. Bert, our house guests are here, she announced as she carried my cage through the door. Mr. Brisbane rolled his wheelchair to the door, and she put my cage in his lap. Welcome back, Humphrey, he said. You're just what we need for spring break. Thanks, I squeaked. After he put my cage on the large table in the living room, Mrs. Brisbane said, Let's get Og out of the car. Mr. Brisbane rolled his chair outside, and when he came back, he had Og's tank in his lap. He and Mrs. Brisbane set it on the table next to me. They're used to being together all the time, she said. Mr. Brisbane nodded. It's hard to understand, but somehow this hamster and this frog are truly friends. He is a very wise man. But recently, I was having trouble connecting with my friend Og. Maybe a week at the Brisbane's house would help. What are your plans for the week, Mr. Brisbane, also known as Bert, asked his wife. Oh, I hope to sleep late every day, she said. Really? I couldn't imagine Mrs. Brisbane sleeping late. I'll have lunch with my friends and clean out a closet or two, she continued. But I also have to catch up on work. Mr. Brisbane took her hand. Do you really have to, Sue? Mrs. Brisbane sighed. I really need to figure out what our class is doing for Family Fun Night. The theme this year is the circus, and I don't have a clue. Mr. Brisbane thought for a moment. You could be clowns. We thought of that already, Mrs. Brisbane said, but Morgan already signed her class up for that. Morgan is Ms. Mack's first name. Morgan McNamara, my first teacher. Mr. Brisbane patted his wife's hand. We'll think of something, she said. I hope so, I squeaked. The Brisbanes both chuckled. If only I could understand him, Mrs. Brisbane said. I think I could learn a lot. I have to admit, I think she was right. While the Brisbanes ate dinner, I talked to Og. Do you know what? I asked. I just thought of something. He replied with a single boing. You know how a circus has all kinds of animal acts? As soon as I squeaked animal acts, my whiskers began to wiggle. They're mostly large and somewhat fearsome creatures like lions, tigers, and elephants. Some of them jumped through hoops. Not the elephants, of course. Bong, bong, Og twanged. He had a lot more to say now than he did when the specks were swimming nearby. And people do tricks on horseback, I added. Boing, Og replied. Humans love them, I said. And I know a couple of other animals that humans love to watch. After dinner, the Brisbins came back to the living room. Anything on TV? Bert asked. Not really, Mrs. Brisbane replied. So let's talk about the circus. Mr. Brisbane leaned back and stared at the ceiling for a moment. I haven't been to the circus for years, he said. Not since Jason was a boy. Jason was the Brisbane's grown-up son who lived far, far, far away. I'd never thought about Mr. Brisbane taking his young son to the circus. I'd never thought about the Brisbans being like the families of my classmates. He really loved the strong man who lifted, I can't remember, something like 2 or 3 times his own weight, Bert said. Eek, I squeaked. And there was the human cannonball, Mrs. Brisbane said. I saw that once when I was a girl. The man flew out of the cannon and landed in a net. Eek, 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 I squeaked. Mr. Brisbane laughed. I don't think you'll be shooting your students out of a cannon or having them lift things twice their weight. The parents might get upset, Mrs. Brisbane said, giggling. I'd never heard her giggle in room 26. They were silent for a while, thinking about circus acts. Sophie's dad can juggle, she said. Oh, I really don't have any ideas at all. Animal acts? I squeaked. Well, no one paid the least attention to me, except Og. Boing! He shouted. Still, the Brisbins were silent as they thought. I'll show them, Og, I told my friend. I scrambled up my tree branch to the tippy top of my cage. Goodness, Mrs. Brisbane said. Humphrey is energetic tonight. I reached up to the top bars of my cage and began swinging my way from one to another. Look at him go, Mrs. Brisbane said. I'd like to see Humphrey on a trapeze. And when I got to the far corner of my cage, I held my breath and let go, dropping all the way to the bottom. Well, thank goodness for the layer of soft bedding there. It was like falling onto a pillow. I quickly leaped onto my wheel and began spinning as fast as I could. Luckily, the Brisbans noticed. Look at him go, Mr. Brisbane said. He is amazing. Up until then, I had not liked the word amazing when it was used to describe 2 swimming specks. But I liked the idea that maybe I was amazing too. Mrs. Brisbane sat up and stared at me. Bert, circuses have animal acts. Well, of course, he said, but I don't think you'll be bringing an elephant to Longfellow School. We have our own animals, she said. The families could do something that has to do with hamsters and frogs. Spin a wheel like Humphrey? Mr. Brisbane said. His wife nodded. Run a maze. Well, just then, Og made a spectacular leap into the water side of his tank. A water tank? Mrs. Brisbane asked. Leapfrog, Mr. Brisbane said. Suddenly they both laughed. I laughed too at the thought of frogs leaping over each other. I think we're on to something, Mrs. Brisbane said. Bert nodded. Thanks to Humphrey and Og, as always. You're welcome, I squeaked. Well, I didn't sleep much that night. I was too busy thinking about animal acts for the circus. I knew that Og and I couldn't do what horses and elephants did, but still, we could help our human friends if we just found a way. Mrs. Brisbane did sleep late on Saturday and spent the rest of the day cleaning out a closet and filling boxes with clothes and books and all kinds of things to give away. She called it spring cleaning. Bert cleaned out his closet as well. What about the circus? I squeaked when they both settled down in the living room for a cup of tea after dinner. Humphrey, you are always telling us what to do, Mrs. Brisbane said. If we could only understand you. I do have some great ideas sometimes, I said. I wish you could understand me too. I was never completely sure whether Og could understand me either, but he chimed in with a very loud boing. The Brisbans both laughed long and hard. I wish they could come here every weekend, Mr. Brisbane said. Mrs. Brisbane nodded. But my students get so much out of having Humphrey come home with them. It was true. I was a big help to my fellow students, but I wanted to help my teacher as well. I have some new thoughts about the circus act, Mrs. Brisbane said. You'll need a ringmaster or ring mistress. Good, 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 I exclaimed. Mr. Brisbane yawned loudly. Mrs. Brisbane yawned loudly, because that's what Mr. Brisbane said. Good idea, Bert, she said. But right now, I just want to go to sleep. Tomorrow, Mr. Brisbane said. Tomorrow, Mrs. Brisbane agreed, and they headed toward the bedroom. Og, I squeaked to my friend. It sounds like we'll have to wait until tomorrow to find out what room 26 is doing for family fun night. Boing, he said. It was a very disappointed boing. Humphrey, spring things. Spring break is fun, that's a fact. But will we come up with a circus act? What do you think, guys? I think they will in the next chapter. And I can't wait to see what it is. I'm sure you guys can either. So I'll be uploading that pretty soon to our channel. And hopefully when we read the next chapter, our friend Rudy will join us. I don't think I told you, my 4th grade friends, but Rudy got a pretty short haircut in last week. So he is looking a little different. So I'm hoping he shows up for our next reading so that I can show you Rudy's new haircut, okay? I hope you guys are doing well. I miss you terribly, and I hope I get to see you really soon. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.